This is Frank, my pet butterfly. He turned 5 weeks old today, so I thought I'd make a little video about him. His life expectancy is 2 to 6 weeks, so he's doing pretty good. And for the record, butterflies do not make good pets. Like any exotic animal, it takes a lot of work to keep them healthy, happy, and alive. And personally for me, I would never keep a butterfly as a pet, especially a monarch, unless it was injured and unable to be rehabilitated, like Frank. So the day that Frank came out of his chrysalis, he was the first one out in the morning. When I saw him, I realized that at some point he had fallen from his chrysalis and had crawled up the back of the enclosure. And at that point, I didn't realize that there was any problems. And it wasn't until a couple of hours later that I came back and checked on all of them that I realized that all of his brothers and sisters were moving around, but he hadn't moved. And that's when I realized that his wings were not fully inflated and that he was really weak. He could hardly hold on to my finger. So the first thing I did was brought him inside and tested him for OE, which is a parasite that monarchs can get, and it affects their development. So when he tested negative for OE, I knew that the problem with his wings was an injury and not a parasite. So I just let him hang out with me all day. I had hoped that when he gained his strength back, that his wings were inflated enough to let him fly. So I was able to get him to eat on the first day, but by the second day, he didn't have much energy at all and he couldn't even hold his wings up, so it wasn't looking good. But I continued to work with him, and on the third day, his little butterfly enclosure arrived. And he really perked up and seemed to enjoy being in it. I decorated it with fresh flowers, sticks, and leaves, everything a butterfly could want. But I ended up taking all of that stuff out of there because it really agitated him having things in his little room. So from there, he started to gain some strength. He was eating good and using his wings more. But it became clear that no matter how much he wanted to, his wings were never going to let him fly. So at that point, I knew he could not be rehabilitated and that he was going to be a pet. So several times a day, I would take him out of his enclosure to let him get some exercise by kind of hopping and flying around the room. But it was during one of these times that he caught his leg on something and ended up breaking it. And everything I've read say that insects aren't able to feel pain, but I'm not sure I believe that. He had a rough few days after breaking his leg. He was restless, he lost his appetite, and it was clear that it was causing him quite a bit of distress. But once he started to feel better, we got into a nice routine and he's been a happy little butterfly ever since. So this is a day in the life of Frank. The first thing in the morning, I wake him up by taking him to the sunlight. I take him out of his room and move him to a medium-sized enclosure. I found that this is the safest way to let him exercise, and as a bonus, it allows me to take him outside where he can get some sun and feel the wind on his wings. In the mornings, it takes him a little bit of time to get going. He doesn't really fly, he just kind of hops around, but every once in a while, he'll get a few inches off the ground. So I just kind of rotate his enclosure around and let him fly. And he'll do this for a half an hour to an hour every morning. And then we go inside for breakfast, which is honey water. And I feed him from my finger because he just doesn't like to be fed the way that the internet says to feed butterflies. He doesn't like to be picked up from his wings, so I don't do that. My hands are always clean before I handle Frank, and I also suspect that he's picking up some sodium and minerals from my skin that are beneficial for him too. After breakfast, one of his favorite things to do is to watch TikToks. He likes wildflowers and nature walks. And then when he's ready, I put him back into his little enclosure and back up on his shelf, where he hangs out the rest of the day. And then the next thing on his schedule is around 4 o'clock, and this is the only time of day where he gets really agitated if I'm not there on time. And we do the same thing that we do in the morning. I take him outside and let him get some exercise. He's much more active at this time, so we stay out here for an hour to an hour and a half. And sometimes I take him on little field trips to visit the wild butterflies. I used to worry that this would agitate and upset him, but he's so much calmer after he sees the wild butterflies. It is the cutest thing. So then we go back inside and he has his dinner. After he eats, he doesn't want to go back into his enclosure. He will normally hang out with me on my hand for an hour or so while I work on the computer. And then when he's ready, he goes back into his enclosure and back up on his shelf until later on that night. And the last part of Frank's day is around 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I call this his midnight snack. I'm not sure if butterflies in the wild are active and feed at night, but the few times that I've skipped this step in his schedule, he's very irritated in the morning. So it's become part of his everyday routine. So after he has his little snack, he likes to watch some more TikToks before bed. And then when he's ready, he goes back into his enclosure and he goes to bed for the night. And we start the whole thing over the next day. I never set out to have a butterfly as a pet, and I wish he could have flown off with his brothers and sisters the day he came out of his chrysalis. But having him has been such a great learning experience for me. He is such a sweet little guy, and the fact that this little butterfly has such a huge personality has made me rethink how I think about all insects. They are so interesting and complex, and I never thought that I could have so much love for a bug. I know my time with him is very limited, so I do everything I can to make sure he has a full and happy little life for as long as he ends up living. The monarch population is declining, and there's a real possibility that butterflies like Frank won't exist in the future. I'm so aware of this fact with every interaction I have with Frank. And you can help Frank's family by planting milkweed. A little milkweed patch in your yard can make a huge difference for the monarch population.